Salutations, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Podcast The Storm, where social awkward outcasts, crazy weirdos, and all-around nerds convene to talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the nerdy occultist, aka the authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
How are you doing, folks? For the 100th time, and good evening.
And I am your host, last time one wannabe, the brainstormer of pop culture. Welcome to our 100th podcast episode special. Basically doing what we did for our 20th episode special. So videos.
Yep. Not knocking over a few more of the sort of anti-SJW rites of passage herein. I'm kind of amazed we haven't gotten to Steve Shives yet, but that might be for 200.
Yeah. Well, before we do, I feel like it's kind of warranted that we do talk a little bit about this being our 100th podcast.
Yeah.
Holy shit. I realize technically this isn't like our 100th video because we've done other stuff on the podcast.
Yeah, there's been sidebars and tangents and one-shots and oh my, but as far as the actual show proper is concerned, this is 100.
Yeah. Full disclosure, I never thought we'd ever get here. Hell, I didn't even think we'd get to 20th episode.
Yeah, it just sort of happened. Something with Brainstorm and I clicked, and I don't think either of us was really expecting it, but it happened, and now here we are. 100 episodes and change later. And did he go quiet or okay?
I was just setting some stuff up. But
Okay.
Yeah, seriously, like it's been one hell of a road, and it feels like we should already have been past this, honestly.
Yeah. But at the same time, it also kind of feels like we just started, even though it has been almost 2 years.
Yeah, and it's really something because, like again, like I never thought that we'd ever get here. Like for whatever reason, but yeah, like it's just been really cool, and it's just something I've looked forward to every week in doing this. And
Yeah, there were definitely times between one and now that this was the only thing that got me through that week. So, yeah.
And also I feel like it's kind of necessary that we thank all our viewers, both those who watch this after and during.
Yeah. Although it doesn't seem like we get many after views. Most of the views we get are during.
Yeah, but yeah, like to everyone who watches this, thank you very much. Like,
yeah,
it's just really cool that we kind of have sort of a fan base.
Yeah, albeit a very niche one, but this is very niche programming. So yeah.
Yeah, like I'm sorry, like I'm just kind of still trying to wrap my head around this because I've just never thought I'd actually be doing this, like at all. Like the whole podcast thing was just kind of a spur of the moment thing, like 2 years ago.
It just sort of happened, like we were saying, and it just I don't think whoever's in charge of this whole universal like synchronicity thing didn't consult us when they were planning this, but it happened anyway.
Yeah, and I hope we're here for the 200th. We do have plans for our 20th, like our 120th.
Yeah,
we've done, because we did our 20th special, so it just seems right that we do a 120th one. Yeah, so I think at this point we're just stalling. So
yeah, let's get into it, ladies and gentlemen. The standard candles will be knocking over tonight, presented by Jonathan McIntosh, and Gavin motherfucking McGinnis.
Yep. Yeah, okay. So yeah, this first one is from The Rebel, by Gavin McGinnis. Hashtag Gamergate. Adults shouldn't be playing video games anyway. Yeah, I think I've seen, like, I think when we actually first met, you sent me this video just on a whim.
As something to cover, because it was something that this is one of the most stupid and yet condescendingly up its own ass things I have ever seen on the internet. And given the caliber of the things that we both have seen over the course of 100 episodes and change of doing this, just think about that.
Yeah. Slyther Claw. Hello. Foosball is on the telly.
Yeah, it's Super Bowl Sunday, but we don't fucking care because this is our Super Bowl. God damn it, we made it to 100 podcasts, and we have no intentions of slowing down in the upcoming months either.
Yeah. Also, before we do that, I want to propose a toast. I realize you don't have anything to drink.
I don't have anything to drink otherwise this would be much more meaningful. Bollocks, what? I'll be right back. I'm gonna grab some Disaronno that I have just in my room because reasons.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So it's
and now I have booze.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I propose a toast to Podcast The Storm for going on for 100 episodes, basically 2 years, and hopefully we'll be doing this for another, I don't know, 500.
Yeah. May the storm continue to rage evermore.
Here, here.
I do not like the taste of alcohol, but Disaronno is okay. Oh, bollocks.
Did you spill it?
Yes, spilled booze. Such a shame.
You don't have carpet, do you?
Yes.
Oh shit, that's oh boy.
I will cover it with something to prevent it from being annoying, and we'll be good.
All right, but yeah. Yeah. So yeah, let us start with this. I don't know. Since it's our 100th, should we change banana to something special?
I don't know.
Century?
Yeah,
probably not. Let's just stick with banana.
Right. Note to self: in future, make these kind of decisions before the move.
Yeah. Let us banana.
Yes. Just banana for the 100th time.
So my buddy Nero got his second bomb threat this week. The first one was a while ago in D.C., and it was at a journalism conference where he was discussing Gamergate. This week, it was another journalism conference in Miami, and they were again talking.
Yes, we all know that the powers that be, especially in journalism and the arts, lost their ever-loving shit over stuck in all of their crawls apparently. But at any rate, banana.
Yeah. Banana.
Gamergate. This was with the factual feminist C.H. Summers. And for those of you who are normal adults, you probably don't know that Gamergate is the idea that feminism and political correctness should work its way into video games. The gamers, that's a movement. Guys who play video games have a name for themselves.
I mean, to be fair, gamers it's been a universal term for, I don't know, for like over
pretty much for as long as humans have been playing games, pretty much, I would imagine. But also, first of all, Gavin, fuck you. That's the exact opposite of what Gamergate is. Gamergate is the notion that social justice and feminism and all that shit should kindly fuck itself off from the games industry and never come back. Because fuck you, your morality has no authority here. Get the fuck out of our games. But I find it perplexing that you find it perplexing that gamers is the word gamer is a term. Even if your straw man of reality were correct and games were just for children or just for the infirmed or just for whatever straw man of gamers you want to make, Gavin, they would still probably call themselves a thing. Because people generally try to call themselves things. And when all you're doing is changing a verb to a noun, i.e., I game, therefore I am a gamer, that really isn't like some massive expenditure of time and energy and intellect. It's just, I am one who engages in this thing to a point that it impacts the nature of who or what I am as a person. Therefore, this is a part of my identity now. It's really not that hard. But fuck you, though. Banana.
Yep, one sec. Okay.
The gamers fought back and said, no, your PC doesn't belong in our world. And Summers and Nero say the same thing. This got a bomb threat both times. This time, though, they managed to get most of the talk out, but the bomb threat dispersed the crowd. Some angry social justice warrior against free speech doesn't want this being discussed, so they discussed it outside after they got...
Okay, I have no problem with him here. He's at least lip servicing the correct argument, which is that feminist morality has no place in this regard. But I'm going to prognosticate, albeit from hindsight here, and say that his only problem with this is not that morality is being arbitrarily inflicted on an art form. It's that it's not his morality that's arbitrarily being inflicted on an art form. Because he's about to go full traditionalist, and it's going to be painful, folks.
So before we do that, Slither Claw says, and this is fun. This fun one. You would think with all the narratives they construct, the SJWs could tell better stories.
You would think. You would definitely think. But that would require self-awareness to realize that they're doing that. And they have none. They don't acknowledge their narratives as narratives. They believe their narratives are objectively true, even though they think objectivity is a sin. Because reasons.
Yep.
Banana.
Banana.
Bomb threaded out. There's a layer of patheticness here, though, that no one is talking about. Namely, I don't care if video games are sexist or not sexist or politically correct. Video games are for little kids. Why are adults playing video games? My brother-in-law got my kids...
Okay, since I have a little more experience in gaming, no offense, Dalton.
None taken. I'm more a retro gamer anyway.
Right. Well, I can talk from like from the video games perspective, and you can argue like the other points he's making.
Yeah.
One of the first video games I remember playing was Assassin's Creed, and then I got into the rest of the series.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good series because it tackles a lot of different story beats and stuff. And I think it's rated M for mature, but not really because of like the standard rating system for mature is what I think
Mm-hmm.
about the story, which is very interesting. Like it's very philosophical and also it's like sci-fi historical fiction,
Mm-hmm.
which I find really cool. But to video games as a medium, like any medium, grow up with the initial audience, like comics did and stuff, and have a maturity about it that befits the readership. And the fact that you are relegating it to just for little kids is both insulting, not to the people who kind of been with like kind of the first generate like the generations of the initial success of the medium, but also to the newer generations, to the kids. Because and here's the thing, kids aren't dumb. They have, to be fair, I think a lot of children, especially these days, have more maturity than most adults and don't like being talked down to and treated like children, essentially, is the best way I can.
Yeah. Okay, and here is door number 2 on this line of argumentation, Gavin. When things are good, they generally gain a degree of universal appeal. It doesn't matter who started playing a given medium, if the effort and the merit was put into that medium, it's going to appeal to any number of people who might be interested in that medium. And here's a case in point. Would you say that adults should not be playing chess? Would you say that adults shouldn't be playing Go? Would you say that adults shouldn't be playing Pai Sho? Or Chinese checkers, or any other variant thereof? Or Mahjong, for fuck's sake? I point all these out because, of course, they are games mostly played by adults that have existed since time immemorial, and I'm gonna go ahead and guess that you don't have a problem with them. Yet, video games, a far more technically advanced medium than board games, for some reason are just banished to the irrelevancy dimension because of more traditionalism for you. And here's the other thing. Video games are a medium. And while certain types of stories are common in certain mediums, a entire medium of art has no bearing on the nature of the story being told within that medium of art. So to say that video games as a whole are for children, or should be for children, is number one, arbitrating from an entirely meaningless standard, and number two, completely fucked in the head. You are basically saying that you are not allowed to tell compelling stories using video games because I say so, because of my worldview. And incidentally, Gavin, you are doing exactly to the letter what the SJWs are doing. You're just doing it from the other end. Instead of instituting PC culture, you're instituting, I don't know, family values culture or some shit. And incidentally, the answer from people like me is going to be the same in both cases. Fuck you, your morality has no authority here. Please fuck off with it. Banana.
Well, I also, fuck, I had something, but
Okay, go ahead.
no, I had something, but I can't.
Take your time. We can
Mortal
wait.
Kombat. That's what I was gonna bring up. To him, I would. I'm sure, like if he saw Mortal Kombat, he said that's not for kids.
Now, I don't know what he would say because Gavin McGinnis is a disingenuous shitstirrer who I don't think even knows what he thinks half the time.
Right, but
that being said, that does bring up an interesting point. If we agree with you, Gavin, that video games should be universally targeted at children, are you then going to clutch your pearls like the right-wing equivalent of an SJW, or more colloquially, perhaps like Helen Lovejoy from The Simpsons, and bitch whenever kids find anything in a medium of art targeted at them that they can actually enjoy? Like if a video game is too violent or too sexy or too mature in its storytelling, are you going to say, think of the children, we need to dumb this down to the lowest and most sanitized common denominator we can?
right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I was done. I was just gonna finish by saying you prick.
Okay. Right. But to close it off again, like tying with the Mortal Kombat thing, it's violent and to an absurd degree, because that's kind of the point of it. It's like I assume it's satire of a sort with the over violence, but and there's a YouTuber called The Fourth Snake that I watch a lot. I'm actually subscribed to that talks a lot about Mortal Kombat stuff, and like if you actually look at the story, it's very interesting and compelling, like with the characters and stuff. And like the writers of like the new stuff kind of have a lot of wasted opportunities that they could have done with these characters.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's just like again, like even though you have like a game that is like gratuitous violence and stuff, like Mortal Kombat, there is still merit to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what's been forgotten a lot.
Well, I don't think in the TradCon case that they would say that has no merit. I think they would say that our morality trumps any artistic merit that might be there, because we have to protect the women and children.
So basically, just it's another scenario. It's just another case of no.
Yeah, it's basically, when you get right down to it, don't censor games and art based on their standards. Censor games and art based on our standards, because that's totally better. Or if I may plumb for the middle option here a little bit, how about just don't censor things based on morality beyond providing like a rating system? Because I'm fine with rating systems existing. Like nobody is saying that, you know, a 3-year-old should be playing a rated M for mature game or anything, but beyond the simple advice of this is a kind of content that you might want to exercise caution with, morality should frankly be put up at the door along with all the other useless ideologies. Whether it's social justice or whether it's family values, both, by the way, euphemistically, my answer is no. You don't get to determine what people may or may not enjoy. Fuck off. And banana.
Yep, banana.
It's a Batman game for Christmas. They can't play it. It's for adults only. Batman? When I was a little kid, we watched Batman on TV because we wanted to be tough and fight bad guys. Now you're 32 and you're sitting there, I'm Batman, I'm Superman, I can fly. Look at my wolf.
Okay,
I-
number one, that's not what goes on in the mind of someone playing one of those games. It's not some kind of escapist projection bullshit. And number two, if you actually knew anything about comics, you would know that number one, the 60s era Batman that the TV show took off of was very much the result of the exact same kind of moralistic censoring that you yourself are tacitly condoning in this case.
Yeah.
And that Batman originally, as in the 1940s when the character was originally launched, was a rather serious character, especially in the context of other superheroes at the time, and regained his seriousness after the lifting of the Comics Code Authority when we finally got the good sense to tell Frederick Wortham, the basically 1950s equivalent to you, Gavin, to go fuck himself.
Mhm. Yeah. Also, as well, no, I am still a Batman fan and also more of a Superman fan. The fact that you are making, I'm not saying like he's making uneducated statements on those characters. And I'll bring up the Arkham games too. Is that those characters are actually very mature and teach a lot about certain things.
Okay, but even if they weren't, even if they were as two-dimensional and simple as he's claiming they are, which they're not,
Yeah.
but even if they were, some things have universal appeal and don't need to be hyper complicated to be meaningful.
Mm.
Like it doesn't matter who a medium is targeted at if a piece of art has potential for universal appeal, it's going to appeal to the widest range of people that can be applied to. Like, for example, did you know, Gavin? I'm saying this for the sake of making the point. I know you don't know this shit, but did you know that at one point in the history of comics, the largest consumers of comics were illiterate GIs in World War fucking II? Are you going to say to a GI in World War II, the so-called greatest generation that I know for a fact you traditionalist types have an immeasurable amount of respect for, and all the more power to you as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the world wars were immeasurably stupid, costly wastes of human life, and anyone that survived them and did good in that process is by definition a hero. But would you say to, I don't know, General Patton or someone like that he is childish and stupid and immature for liking comic books? Because I'm willing to bet my own balls that you would not say any such thing to a World War II veteran who said, I really love comic books. Gavin, what you are doing is you are projecting a framework onto the concept of comics because you haven't had any understanding of the concept of comics, or at one point you did, and you were shamed and beaten so mercilessly by cultural censure that you were forced to get rid of them. And this is the thing, and this is the disingenuous thing again, that we got onto Bomar for basically doing the same shit back in the 20th episode.
Wow.
Instead of being willing to go to the mat for something that you loved or something that you might have loved at one point, you cucked to norms and decorum and consensus and basically told yourself that the things you liked as a child had no universal appeal or no universal value. That you were stupid for ever liking them, essentially, is the implication. And that's really fucking nihilistic, for one, and completely irrational for another, because nobody actually made an argument to you as to why comic books were immature or bad. You were just told by your saintly mommy and daddy that, well, Junior, you've got to grow up and grow out of comic books now. When in actuality, you had to do no such thing, and their own warped perspective is the only basis they had for that claim. And you could have easily told them, perhaps not in quite as PG-13 terms, because child, but you could have told them as politely as possible to fuck off and let you enjoy your comics. Now, granted, you might have been beaten for that, but this is the thing. There were plenty of us back in the day who did say, you know what? No, comics are awesome inherently, and we're going to keep them because they're awesome, and the world needs more awesome things. And were literally beaten up not just by their peers, but also possibly by their parents because they had the same wrong-headed bullshit traditionalistic idea that you do, which incidentally was created by Frederick fucking Wertham and completely has nothing to do with the actual content of the medium itself. But never mind. Banana.
Well, I also want to bring up the Arkham games.
Yeah.
Fuck. Right. All the Arkham games. Maybe Arkham Asylum was rated teen. No, wait. I think all the Arkham games were rated M for mature.
Yeah.
And mature doesn't really mean adult, to be
No.
fair.
It means mature. That's why it's called that.
And again, I know a lot of kids and teenagers who have more maturity than some adults I've met.
Yeah. And I'm sure on that point Gavin would probably agree with you because he knows what social justice warriors and snowflakes are like. But the point is, Gavin, actually this does bring up an interesting point. Why did you assume that just because a game was rated mature that your children couldn't play it? Is it because your children are actually demonstrably immature, or is it because you went all moralistic and won't somebody please think of the children? To which I would say, don't you remember being a child and finding things that pushed the limits, pushed the boundaries, pushed the things that your parents told you were acceptable? Don't you remember being either a kid or a teenager and finding that to be the most compelling thing you could possibly find about something? If your parents told you, no, this is not for you, what did you do? If you were like any other normal human child at that time, you would have said, well, if they want to keep it from me, it must be something interesting.
Yep. I'll bring up this thing later, if it comes up. But yeah. Banana.
Wolverine shirt. He has claws. You read comic books? That is for people who are special, okay? In the old days, you lived in the basement because you were mentally handicapped. When we saw 12-year-olds playing Star Wars with 9-year-olds, we went, poor bastard, oh well. I guess he'll be living with his mommy forever. Now that's cool. Now you want to argue?
Okay, there was a lot in there.
I so much fucking self-righteously condescending stupidity I can't even. Okay, first things first, Gavin. What are the largest industries in the world? Serious question. What are the largest and most profitable industries in the goddamn world right now? Answer: computers. And what do computer companies have in common? They were all of them started by the kind of people that you are sitting there deriding right now. You want to know why? Because when we were told you need to give up your favorite pastimes, your favorite hobbies, the things that make your life worth living, we suffered the slings and arrows, whether people laughed at us or whether people beat us up or whatever the fuck. at least in like the 70s and the 80s when this was most applicable, people decided that comics and D&D and video games and whatever the fuck else, whatever other geeky hobbies they liked, were worth putting up with the bullshit for. And a lot of us said, you know what, you guys are wrong, and someday I'm gonna show you.
Right.
And it was that same goddamn drive that led to a lot of those geeky people creating innovations that other people couldn't consider. And you want to know why other people couldn't consider it? Because they were trapped within a box of these are the approved thoughts, and you may not step outside of them that you are exactly espousing right here.
Yeah. I also want to bring up, as a comic reader myself, who is 21 right now, and has been reading comics since I was 13 or so. I read comics earlier, but I didn't start collecting them until I was like 13 or so. So,
yeah.
But there are comics that I've read that are on the level of like acclaimed New York Times novels. I'm talking classic ones.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite ones, which really got me more interested in Superman, which is All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison, who is an amazing writer, by the way. It's a story of Superman, like his last year on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And the real story of why that book was even written by Grant Morrison, why Grant Morrison did that story, was because his father had recently passed by the time of him writing that.
Mm-hmm.
So the story, again, like the story is about Superman dying, and basically the whole year left is him trying to make sure the world can carry on without him and doing as much good as he possibly can before he leaves it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, that story kind of, well, to be fair, I read that recently in the last few years, but that character of Superman, the comics I've read from Superman, have shaped my worldview of doing as much good as I possibly can for however long I can. Kind of, again, like it's made me the person that I am. And again, a lot of comics, especially like some of the older ones from like the 90s, 80s, and early 2000s, are written at the level of acclaimed novels because the writers put in the effort to make them like that. Unintentionally, of course.
Yeah, because they were just interested in telling a good story and using comics to do it, and so they did.
Yeah.
But once again, here's the thing, Gavin. Your assumption there that anyone who reads comics or likes Star Wars or whatever the fuck must be developmentally disabled in some way is categorically wrong. Not only because of historically some of the largest readership among comics and various other mediums were adults, but because the world you currently live in, Gavin, would not be possible without the very same fucking nerds that you thought were developmentally disabled because they read comic books and enjoyed comic books. Because you couldn't conceive in your brain that the powers that be, the norms and the authorities amongst your community, the authority figures you looked up to, might be in any way short-sighted or limited in their thinking. And you further assumed that because the people who you considered authority figures or the concepts you considered authority figures couldn't be mistaken in any meaningful way, that anyone who tried to stand against that grain must therefore be not only stupid, but apparently certifiably mentally disabled. When in actuality, what happened there, and this is demonstrable based on, again, the world in which we currently find ourselves, Gavin, that they saw something you didn't see and they therefore gained more enjoyment and more meaning out of their lives because of these art forms they liked. And what's more, again, there's so many things wrong with this. I'm gonna have to come up with multiple examples. H.P. Lovecraft got his start in what was essentially a comic. It was a pulp magazine, which is basically the great granddaddy of all comics. Would you say to anyone that enjoyed H.P. Lovecraft that there was no meaning in any of those stories and they were stupid for liking them? Would you honestly walk up to John Carpenter and tell him that his entire career was meaningless because he took inspiration from H.P. Lovecraft? And if you are that ridiculously stupid and hardline, Gavin, I pity your existence. Because this is the thing. Human beings, okay, Gavin, seek out art and storytelling because it is one of the ways that we can obtain meaning. It is a fundamental human nature that is the result of us being a social species. To deny this aspect of ourselves is to frankly deny most of what makes us human. I cannot, in good conscience, believe I am sitting here listening to you say that people who enjoy art that you don't understand must be mentally disabled because they think differently from you. How in the lake of shit do you get off believing that you are not an SJW? And if it's because you're Christian conservative and like traditionalistic, then I invite you to observe this thing we call the Satanic Panic, or the Red Scare, or any of the other dozens of moral panics over the years caused by what I generally refer to as right-wing SJWs. I'm not saying the left-wing ones are therefore good or therefore excusable or anything like that. They are bullshit too, because it's my contention that morality should not be enforced in this way. Nobody should have the moral censor banhammer. Nobody should be able to say, this art offends me, so it's not allowed to exist. Nobody should be able to say, people of certain kinds shouldn't be allowed to consume this art because I say so. Because of my definition of what that person is or what they should think like. And incidentally, Gavin, if you ever actually read a comic or played video games, you might in fact see why stories like Batman Arkham Knight or The Sandman or Solomon Kane or Elric of Melniboné were so much more preferable to the bastardized and broken shell of a medium that people like your sorry ass gave us in the form of Frederick Wertham and the goddamn Comics Code Authority for almost 2 decades and set the medium back at least a century. Fuck you, Gavin. Banana.
You about it. Now guys are online with their headsets yelling at 12-year-olds saying, come back out, I want to kill you. I want to shoot you with my nerd drawing gun. And you're a nerd drawing too.
Oh, I know, because you don't want to come kill us. You have no gun. It's okay.
Oh, yeah,
No, we're pissed.
Oh, you're so pissed. It's okay.
Hey, adult man.
Okay. To be fair, that's a small percentage of people.
Yeah.
Legitimately, those are actually just teenagers.
Yeah. And
teenagers
also
are shits.
and also it's called being a human being and expressing emotions without a filter for 5 goddamn seconds. Which is exactly why mediums like art and storytelling exist, to allow us to extricate our emotions for 5 seconds and uncork them without the threat of moral censure. Because he is eventually going to turn it here, and I think this is exactly where he starts doing it. He's going to say that any kind of enjoyment of art or storytelling is in fact a vice, and the people who do it should be ashamed of themselves for doing it, and that it should be something you do in private and not ever publicly expressed or enjoyed. I may be mistaken, or I may be misquoting or applying this, but I'm almost certain I would put money on the fact that he's about to make this into a moral argument.
I think it was
He's going to say that people who engage in this kind of art are just useless failures who are insecure and broken and they need to fuck off. Basically.
Joke's on you. Is it Gavin or Gavin?
Gavin.
Joke's on you, Gavin. I was already insecure and broken long before I played video games and read comics.
Yeah. And I hate to break it to you, Gavin, but to be flawed is to be a human being. But also, incidentally, things are not flaws and sins and vices just because you say so. You actually have to provide some kind of reasoning as to why, and then that reasoning needs to stand up to this thing we call scrutiny. Whether it's empirical scrutiny or logical scrutiny, the point is it needs to be scrutinized and survive the scrutiny. Your pronouncements, sir, are nothing but naked norms and authority with no substance behind them, and in fact with nothing but a fucked up, overly restrictive framework behind them. Banana.
Males, hey dads, you're supposed to know stuff. You're supposed to know how things work. You're supposed to know how to fix a fridge. You're supposed to be able to get a piece. You're supposed to be building a table or something. Yes, we watch TV sometimes. Yes, we indulge ourselves in movies. Sometimes we even read fiction. I don't read fiction, but I get that sometimes you do that. That happens occasionally. And when
this makes no fucking sense because he's backtracking.
Because there are no politicians or professors or anyone who does anything in the abstract or intellectual realm.
Legitimately, I remember there being a documentary about a guy who taught comic books as a college course.
Well, but the thing that baffles me is he appears to be advocating for the world to return to like some kind of Amish or like quasi medieval state where like the only professions that exist are the kind that you like. I think he wants every profession that isn't a trade to just immediately be wiped off the face of the planet.
Do you know what the problem with that is? Those things suck immensely.
Yeah. The reason why trades are as well regarded and well paid as they are, Gavin, is because they're difficult. And because if there was a situation where we didn't have to do them or there was an easier way to do them, we would take that option. And you want to know how I know? Because people keep inventing ways to make those professions easier. You don't still have to literally cut down a tree and forge the wood into the shape of a table every time you want a table or a chair or some shit. There are machines who do that for us because somebody who you probably would call a nerd and would assume had mental disabilities figured out, hey, I can make a machine that does this 10,000 times faster and more effectively than this, and it would save us all a bunch of time and energy. And we could choose to put that time and energy into things we actually want to do or would choose to do in a vacuum. Because the thing is, Gavin, struggles are important, yes, and I think you can tell a lot about a person from how they handle struggles. But you can also tell a lot about a person from how they would choose to spend their time if they didn't have any struggles. How you choose to spend your time and energy and effort when you don't have external restrictions on you, when you're not chained to a fucking wall by some abstraction or other, says a lot more about you sometimes than the stuff you do when you're forced to do it. Because the things you do when you're forced to do them don't actually come from you. They are imposed on you from without. What defines your nature is the stuff that comes from you into the external world, not upon you from the external world. Gavin. Because it doesn't say anything about you that you have to eat or that you have to breathe. It does say something about you the kind of food you would choose to eat or the kind of air you choose to expose yourself to if you live in a city or a country or whatever, because that actually is an expression of your nature to some extent. Slavery is not an extension of the slave's mind, is the thing. It's an extension of the slaveholder's mind, or the abstraction that allows slavery to exist. It says something about that, but it does not say anything about the actual mind of the slave, because the mind of the slave is not owned by the slave. And you appear to be asserting that people should willingly choose to essentially enslave their minds to something so abstract and so nonsensical that it literally takes 2 seconds to counter with a reasonable argument. And to say we should keep slaves is one level of evil. To say that people should turn themselves into slaves is quite another. To say that people should turn themselves into slaves to something that can't be satisfactorily demonstrated to meaningfully exist by your own logic is fucking terrifying. To say that you should be a slave to my ideal rather than to an entity is actually even more frustrating and even more horrifying than saying you should be a slave to this person over here. Because this person over here can at least be quantified and reasoned with. An idea, especially one with no logical backing or any ability to counter-argue it, is fucking immovable and immortal. And therefore, their slavery will never fucking end. Banana.
You're wasting time watching a show. That's a vice. It should be discouraged. It's not something to be proud of. You don't go, I'm a watch TVer. Get out of here. There's a bomb threat at my watch TV conference. What the
Because critics
What the
totally
nonsense.
don't exist, artists totally don't exist, and electricians and the people that actually like make TVs totally don't exist, Gavin. This appears to be the claim you're making. Either that they don't exist or that they shouldn't. Because it's in some way indulgent. Like, your argument here appears to be like if we followed your argument to something resembling a logical conclusion, TVs would no longer exist because people would stop making them, because people like you would come along and say, since TV is sinful and to be discouraged, why don't we just stop making TVs so that way people aren't tempted anymore? Number one, how exactly are you defining whether this is a vice? Number two, why should we care about your definition? And number three, what harm, either to the person or to the world or to whatever, is occurring because people enjoy television? Obviously, if people enjoy it a little too much, that might get a little excessive. Just like every other sin in human history. And this is the funny thing. Originally, sins were just an excess of behavior. Like nobody but the most hardened monks would say that eating itself was a sin, but quite a lot of people could agree that gluttony was a sin. Nobody would say that procreation itself was a sin and to be discouraged, except for, again, maybe the most extreme out there. But a lot of people could agree that excessive lust was a problem, and greed, and like success in business is not a bad thing, but greed is, and so on and so forth. I'm using the example of the 7 deadly sins just because it's the easiest example. But you, Gavin, appear to be saying that the simple engagement with any kind of fiction or art or storytelling at all is itself sinful. Not the over consumption of it, not the nature of whatever you're consuming itself, but apparently even consuming it and saying I'm a person who consumes this thing is a problem for you. Fuck you so hard that they need to determine a new level of force to determine how hard you're being fucked, Gavin.
I don't know.
Banana.
Prince. What the fuck? Put down the console, you grown man baby. It's embarrassing.
You know what else?
To you, Gavin, it is embarrassing, but you appear to have not matured, actually matured, since the age of about 7. And see, this is the thing, and this is exactly the issue I had with Belmar. Maturity is not a set of beliefs. It's not a set of axioms. It's not a deference to authority. Maturity is a series of behaviors warranted from a certain level or created from a certain level of development. And there has been no evidence whatsoever that the consumption of art or the consumption of storytelling in some way inhibits maturation. In fact, psychologically speaking, the refusal to engage with on any level with some kind of abstraction or narrative storytelling is actually a sign of emotional and mental stunting, because we as humans start out only dealing with the world as it is in physical terms, but as we grow older we develop this thing called a theory of mind, which is essentially the facility that allows us to imagine, well, frankly, just imagine, period. The ability to project our mental awareness outside of the fundamental building blocks of existence, basically. And if you don't have that, or you don't have any interest in nurturing that, then you actually are essentially advocating for purposefully retarding and sheltering apparently just everyone. And so much fuck you, Gavin. Next. Or did he leave again?
I just came back.
Okay.
I was eating.
Okay. After Gavin McGinnis, I'm starting to think Jonathan McIntosh might be easier. I mean, I'm gonna regret saying that in about 5 seconds, but at least for the moment, I can genuinely say that I would rather have a conversation with Jonathan McIntosh than I would try to get through the thick skull of Gavin McGinnis.
Right. Okay. So this is another one that Dalton sent me. I do think we won't cover most. We'll cover half of it, and maybe try to finish it next week.
Yeah.
Just because I'm a little tired and stuff. So.
Yeah, I think we're both tired.
Yeah.
So.
But we are.
We'll see how far we get. But yeah, full Macintosh.
Actually, some background. I didn't know full Macintosh or
Jonathan McIntosh.
Jonathan McIntosh, because I don't really keep up to trends on like that. But thanks to Dolan, he kind of gave me some explanation.
Yeah. Once upon a time, he was Anita Sarkeesian's boyfriend and editor/producer. Since they broke up, he kind of went off on his own, but he's still espousing much of the same feminist theory bullshit as it pertains to popular culture. And where that happens, we come along and attempt to introduce a little light to the subject. So, full Macintosh.
Yeah. Oh, banana.
Full Macintosh.
This is tag 2. Take one. Mark. Okay, here we go.
The Big Bang Theory is the most popular show on television. It centers on 4 male friends who are characterized by essentially every Hollywood stereotype about geeks and nerds in existence.
All right, just a few more.
Okay, I will grant you that the nerds in Big Bang Theory are excessively stereotypical, but those stereotypes come from a real place, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're oversimplified. Obviously, they're overblown. Yada yada yada. But nerds exist, and therefore, characters who are nerds will also exist.
Yeah. Like Don said, they are oversimplified. I'm not saying that there aren't nerds like that, but modern day, probably not. Like,
Yeah. Although to be fair, a large part of the encroachment of the I fucking love science crowd into the geek space probably has a lot to do with this show.
true. What I was gonna say was classic nerds that we know in our circle, like, are actually pretty fucking cool comparatively to the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that, just as an example, our friend and friend of the channel, Mr. E, probably could break every single one of these people in a like 1-on-4 fight.
Yeah. Also, one of the many Florida men in our little circle.
Yes, weaponized nerd rage. He's basically a real life version of the Punisher.
Yep.
He could and probably would go John Wick on their asses if he could.
Like, just seriously, like, it's so weird how we're considered like the outcasts and the weirdos and stuff, which we are, granted, but somehow we're so much cooler than the normies.
Because again, it appears to be a mentality whereby, because the cultural consensus is this stuff is off-putting somehow, a lot of people, for whatever reason, just never look. And that's one of the reasons that despite the flaws of things like the MCU, I do love the MCU, because it's from that same mentality of Kevin Feige going, you guys, stop ruining comic book movies by removing all the comic booky shit from them. You know these would be 1,000 times better if we just left them alone and tried to make them as close to the original comics as we could, and paid more attention to things like storytelling. And people went, that's silly, Kevin. And Kevin Feige, being a classic nerd, went, hold my beer. And 10 years later, we're still fucking talking about the MCU as probably the greatest current franchise on the Hollywood stage.
Mm-hmm.
So, oops, I guess.
Yeah. I will also say that the weird thing is they are the stereotypical nerds in pop culture, like fiction-wise.
Yeah.
And I get that. But every nerd has their differences.
Yeah, and that is something that I think Big Bang Theory does a pretty decent job of displaying, because they're not all carbon copies of each other. Now, granted, that this was also done, I think, much better in a show in the early 2000s called Freaks and Geeks that was set back in the 80s. But
well, what I meant is they don't really seem to have difference in likes, is what I mean.
Yeah, I think that's mostly for the sake of sitcom shorthand, kind of.
Fair enough.
But at the same time, Wolowitz is not the same as Sheldon, is not the same as Howard, is not the same as Raj.
Personality, and
like their mannerisms and stuff.
But what I mean is, in terms of likes of
there should be a little bit more
nuance.
Well, there should be a little bit more of a wide breadth of things they can be interested in. It would be nice to see like one of them likes something and the others don't, or vice versa. And sometimes they do that. Like, I think Leonard likes Babylon 5, where Sheldon cannot stand Babylon 5.
I've never seen that. I mean, like, I know of it, but I've never actually.
Yeah, me either. I know of it, and I got the reference when they made it in the show, but I've never actually watched it.
I've heard,
I hear it's good, and I probably will at some point try to watch it, but I haven't yet.
yeah. Um, I heard screaming. And that's not on my side.
I think my family is reacting to the Super Bowl or some shit. I don't know.
Okay, shall we?
For Macintosh.
I'm just gonna stick with banana.
More feet, and here we are, gentlemen. The gates of Elzebub.
Good Lord. Don't panic. This is what the last 97 hours have been about.
Leonard, Sheldon, Howard, and Raj all lack most of the traits traditionally associated with leading men in Hollywood. They're not conventionally handsome.
I mean, yes.
By Hollywood standards, no, but you stick them in any rural area throughout the country, and I guarantee you none of them is going to have a problem getting laid.
Anyone can, though. That's...
Well, what I mean is Hollywood standard for what qualifies as attractive is significantly higher than most of the rest of the country. You
Fair
take the most unattractive person from Hollywood, you stick them anywhere that's not Hollywood, and they're going to probably get laid even if the person doesn't know they're a famous actor.
Yeah, so he's not wrong about the whole Hollywood thing. That's fair. But
I'm curious what he's gonna end up defining the like classic traits of a Hollywood leading man are, because I'm guessing at least one or two of them is going to be fucked. Because it's Jonathan McIntosh, and I feel reasonably confident in making this assumption. Also, I've watched this video already. So
I only got through a fun story, and I told Don this right before the stream, and also when he first suggested this video. I only got to 2.5 minutes before I decided to stop the video, and yeah, no, we need to watch this.
Yep. Yeah, your reputation precedes you, Mr. McIntosh.
All right.
For Macintosh.
Banana.
Conventionally handsome, they're not confident, and they're definitely not athletic. What they are dorky, insecure fanboys who are plagued with a wide variety of anxieties, illnesses, and awkward personality quirks. They also happen to be the perfect embodiment of a media trope which
Okay,
You seem to be very dismissive of social awkwardness and anxiety in this case.
yeah,
I don't think he was intending to be, but this is really coming off as tee look at the invalid people.
okay, so yeah, the thing is everyone at some point in their life has been an awkward social mess. It's just kind of part of life.
Yeah, and even if you're not socially awkward by the world at largest standards, you may well be the bottom rung in whatever your particular friend group totem pole is. There was a really great movie. Well, I don't know if I would say really great, but it was a pretty good, decent little movie a couple of years ago called The Duff, and it sort of drew a spotlight to this notion that sometimes friend groups will have somebody they who's a little below them in terms of social status, but they'll keep them around for like social utility reasons to make themselves look better by comparison usually. And even if you're the top rung among normal people, you might be the bottom rung if you hung out with a bunch of male models or some shit.
Oh my
As an
god, I'm
example.
Duff. I was the Duff.
Yeah, so was I.
I say this is your friend. That does not surprise me.
No, it doesn't. Nor was I expecting it to. We've been friends for going on 2 years, so you know me well enough at this point. Also, my charisma score takes like an automatic -5 because of the disability thing.
To be fair, I was a third wheel to a couple who were my friends, so automatically that makes me the duff.
Yeah. I think I was kind of a universal duff. Whenever I would try to get involved in social things, I would just kind of default to the duff position.
Yeah.
Which to be fair is not in any way a judgment on the people that did or didn't do that. It's just I think that's where I fall in most social circles.
Right, but again, like the thing with Big Bang Theory is and you and I did a brief discussion before stream, is the first couple seasons are fine. Like my main issue was it wasn't true to the whole nerdism.
Yeah, it was very superficial in its geekery. And you could tell because a lot of the pop culture references they made were very superficial and they weren't really connected to anything. When in actuality, one of the hallmarks of geek stuff is one of the ways you demonstrate your knowledge of something is by having differences of opinion about it and having arguments over really obscure, stupid things. Seemingly. Really obscure and stupid things.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me. But yeah, I had something. Yeah, it's just like there was no real variety. It was all very much the same. And like I always hated when they went to the comic shop.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly on the fact that the comic shop seemed very empty. Like
it did. And they were only ever interested in like the mainline heroes. And speaking as a nerd who is very much interested in basically anything but the mainline heroes a lot of the time, that kind of annoys me because the thing about a group of nerds you got to understand is while everybody at least has some knowledge of every hero just by osmosis of hearing about it through the grapevine, everyone has their own specialties. Like I, for example, my area of geekery is anything weird, metaphysical, or cosmic. That's always my area of geekery. Any new franchise I get into, I always gravitate towards whatever aspect of that franchise is weird, metaphysical, or cosmic.
right.
Where somebody like Brainstormer is much more street level in his preferences.
Well, okay, no, you're not wrong, but I also have it really just depends on whether or not I find the characters and story good.
Yeah, and then of course there's that factor as well. I mean there are, believe it or not, people who don't find Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, or the Hulk to be very interesting characters. And again, hi. But there are other people, many of them, who would probably just as soon put a bullet through my head for even insinuating such a thing just now.
No, I get that. I get that. I would be willing to argue with you on the whole Spider-Man thing, but that's because I grew up with.
Case in point. Maybe not to the extreme degree as the people I was just referring to, but trust me, they exist.
Yeah. And again, like one of my favorite superheroes. It was kind of like one of the first superheroes I was introduced to. Was Spawn. I've made no effort
Secret of that, yeah.
Yeah, made no secret of that. He's you're right. He's street level, but also more. But
yeah, he's also on the weirder side of things, and I know because he's on my list of characters as well. Although I admit I haven't given him quite as much time as I have other characters, just because.
To be completely honest, I'm just more of like an indie superhero guy, because when superheroes and indie comics do stuff, mostly it stays and like the whole status quo is constantly shifting and there's no real stable constant.
Yeah.
You never know where it's going. And that's kind of what I've slid off from like the main two, the Marvel and DC lately, as of like last decade or so, is because they're reverting too much back and not going forward.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a totally different thing
Mhm.
than what we're supposed to be discussing.
Yeah.
Oh, you remember those 3D glasses? Like they have the image here.
Yeah, the red and blue ones.
God, I wish they would do that. You know, like the ones you have these days are just kind of meh.
I don't know. I like some of the new designs. I just wish you got to keep them more often, because I don't really like returning the glasses after the end, especially not if it's like a specially redesigned pair of 3D glasses for the movie in question, because they do that sometimes. I like to keep those usually.
Well, see, I don't mind them with those ones. I just wish they'd maybe keep the red and blue lenses.
Yeah, just to keep the aesthetic going. Yeah, because it's such a iconic visual at this point, just by itself.
Yeah. Ironically, the glasses I have on my Icon were originally the red and blue 3D glasses, but I changed them to black and white. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah, that was a full-on weird tangent there.
It was.
Okay, but Banana?
Banana.
Trope, which I call the adorkable misogynist. Adorkable misogynists are male characters whose geeky version of masculinity is framed as both comically pathetic and endearing.
Well, wait, what's on top of that?
Wireless webcams, way below.
And it's their status as nerdy nice guys that
Oh my god.
Okay, that. Okay.
Macintosh. I know I'm speaking to a metaphorical brick wall here, because you will never understand this, but you cannot just start your default assumption with misogyny. Because, okay.
Well, to be fair,
Mackin-
I cut him off when he was explaining it. So
Right, okay, but the fundamental crux of this is going to be, I think, that Macintosh, misogyny is basically a mental disorder, quite frankly. Because human beings, right, are a social species. And a social species that spends the majority of its nurturing years with its maternal parent. Therefore, for most people, the maternal parent is the first demonstration of what it even is to be human. And thereby, young humans will develop an instinctive bond with the mother. And this will become a distinctive bond with all women later on when puberty hits and the search for sexual partners begins. They have demonstrated this in research, Macintosh, that men actually have an out-group preference, which means that men actually prefer to protect, provide for, and nurture women than they do other men. And the funny thing is, women actually have an in-group preference, i.e., women tend to bond stronger with other women. Which means, basically, that every motherfucker on the planet has an innate bias in favor of women. The only way around this appears to be if the offspring in question happens to be horrifyingly abused in one way or the other. Which I point out because it implies, at least, that to be a misogynist in any meaningful way, Macintosh, your brain literally has to be broken. There literally has to be neurological damage to your brain, either caused physically or socially, for you to genuinely be considered a misogynist. Because human beings bond with and have a desire innately to protect women, which makes perfect sense because the women are the ones carrying the children and therefore propagating the continuation of the species. And women are also the ones doing the mate selecting. And if you don't believe me, try getting a man that no women like laid. It's not going to happen. Unless his brain is broken and he commits a horrifying action of, sexual assault or rape. Which, again, to be either of those things, you also have to have a broken brain. Because our entire array of like sexual cognition is about the desire of the other person. We want to be desired by a person we find desirable. Desire is the key feature of what makes a human sex drive work. So if you are a human being who can disregard the desire of others that you desire sexually, then your brain is broken on a fundamental level. Banana.
1 second. All right. Let me move it back because he was in the middle of talking and.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Wireless webcams, wait below.
And it's their status as nerdy nice guys that then lets them off the hook for a wide range of creepy, entitled, and downright sexist behaviors.
You may want to put on slacks.
What? Ew! Stop it! No! Leave me alone!
Okay. First of all, what is being demonstrated there, Macintosh, is not misogyny. It is desire. And quite frankly, Macintosh, desire is the opposite of hatred. And what misogyny means, Macintosh, is the hatred of women.
Right. Also,
So,
like.
if
sorry.
you're going to try to prove to us that misogyny exists in anywhere based on showing us the desire for women by other characters, you have failed already, Macintosh. Desire is the opposite of hate.
Right. And I also like to point out it's Howard Wolowitz.
Yeah.
And he's a fucked up person. Legitimately, I think.
Yeah. Also, when has Howard ever been let off the hook in the context of the show? Ever?
Remember that time he tried to kiss Penny and she socked him in the face?
Yes, and we as the viewers are supposed to root for Penny in that situation. Also, one of the reasons why nerds were beat up back in the day was because they were socially awkward. And their social awkwardness often led them to doing things that would offend or frustrate other people, and usually would result in them possibly insulting the very women they tried to obtain. And very often leading those girls' boyfriends to beat the living fuck out of them. So, fuck off entirely with your notion of nerds getting let off the hook for anything in relation to women or sex. Because, in fact, the opposite often appears to be the case, whereby if a man is attractive enough, women will actively ignore things that would otherwise be red flags in less attractive men, and will actively find reasons to dislike behaviors in less attractive men that they would be fine with and even encourage in attractive men. I.e., when attractive men are aggressive and dominant, they're being an alpha. When geeky guys are being aggressive and dominant, they're being creepy and entitled. That appears to be the main distinction there. If you are inherently a desirable person, you can do whatever the fuck you like. And if you are an inherently less desirable person, you can get fucked for doing just natural things. That's the thing.
That might explain why every time I asked a girl out, she said no.
Yeah, someday you will find a woman who will say yes, and she will be very lucky when she does. I said that both as your friend and from a objective assessment of the situation.
Well, I'll be lucky if she says yes. So.
Yeah, but what I mean is that when you find someone who considers you attached, she will benefit from knowing you.
Yeah. and again, the reason I bring this up is because, and like I've always kind of, again, like no one's really ever seen my face, but Dalton has. Comparatively to general people, I am less than idealistic in physical form.
Yeah.
I do make it up for personality, but that's besides the point.
I mean, I personally think you're kind of cute, but that's me.
Fair enough.
Also, I fully realize that's not exactly helpful because that no offense to me, I know, but you don't swing that way, so not helpful. But still.
But no, I get what you mean. Again, to a general like audience, I'm not I'm not an idealistic form.
You're not gonna be a cover model for Calvin Klein anytime soon.
I don't do Calvin Klein, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Levi's more comfortable. I think, actually.
I don't really put that much thought into my brand of underwear usually, as long as they work.
Oh no, I thought. Wait, Calvin Klein is underwear? I thought it was pants.
It's a lot of things. It's a clothing brand in general, but I believe they started with underwear.
Okay, never mind. It's weird tangent.
Yeah.
Also, would you also argue the fact that he's taking clips out of context as well?
Yeah.
Right.
And also, in that scene, we're supposed to be siding with Penny, which definitely means the show is not framing the awkwardness or the quote unquote creepiness of the main characters as a good thing or excusable.
I will say I do hate the whole format of the laugh track because there's always like if I've seen so many edits where they've taken the laugh track out and it's honestly just really fucking weird.
Yeah, if you could remove the actual humor by removing the laugh track was probably not warranted to begin with.
Kind of way I like How I Met Your Mother because they film the whole thing and edit it together and show the episode itself to an audience
and put the laugh track where the actual audience laughs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, shall we?
Yeah, banana.
Now, in order to help explain how this convention works, we will need to take a quick trip back in time to the 1980s. The year was 1984. And one of the most popular summer movies was a film called Revenge of the Nerd.
I've never seen that movie. I've heard of it, but I've never.
It's good. It's a bit dated, but it's good.
Right. Okay. Shall we?
Yeah, banana.
These weren't the first socially awkward nerds to grace the big screen, but they did help popularize this type of character. Over the next few years, this geeky guy archetype quickly gained traction in Hollywood.
How's it going?
I mean, okay,
You just contradicted your own bullshit, Macintosh. You just said that geeks have not been seen as positive figures right up until around the time of Revenge of the Freaking Nerds in 1984, in a medium that has existed since the early 1900s. So if things like Revenge of the Nerds used to be the exception, what does that tell you about the average culture's approach to nerds as a whole, Macintosh? It says that they were usually used as the butt of the joke, not as the sympathetic characters, meaning that we therefore were not supposed to sympathize with them until some people who actually were nerds probably got into Hollywood and decided to use the platform that is Hollywood to make a point that honestly probably should have been made long before this, but never mind.
Shall we?
Banana.
Banana.
And by the 1990s, it had become something of a mainstay in comedy entertainment. It's worth noting that this type of character is nearly always white, though there are a few rare exceptions.
Okay,
So,
question. Why are you showing Steve Urkel instead of Carlton Banks? Because Carlton Banks was a much better black nerd icon in both the 90s and now.
Slytherin Claw says 1984, an interesting choice of year.
Isn't it just, though? Isn't it just?
See, that's where I decide, like, the whole white male thing. Why the fuck did this have to be? I thought it was about quote-unquote misogyny. Why the fuck is it now about race?
Because the patriarchy prefers whites. Because reasons. And therefore we need to feel all guilty over the fact that more white characters existed in a medium that was produced primarily in a white majority country. Because reasons.
That right there, that is when I knew we had to cover this video.
Yep.
Uh,
That kind of makes sense, yes.
I wish I could get some liquor right now. I feel like I need it.
I would offer to you some of mine, but we haven't worked out the Wonka Vision style teleportation device yet.
Plus germs, so.
True, but I would pour it into something else if you preferred me to.
All right.
Banana.
Jinx, by the way.
Yes.
The Hollywood nerd is almost always positioned in opposition to the expected norms of macho manhood. This is usually accomplished through the juxtaposition with the jock archetype. When contrasted with hyper-masculine guys who perform a crude, aggressive form of manhood,
who also are not portrayed very often as sympathetic characters, Macintosh, which implies that both extremes of masculinity, if you like to call them that, are usually things that are to be discouraged.
Yeah, like there's like both sides are like it's the two extremes.
Yeah, because the thing is, Macintosh, your definition of masculinity leaves a lot to be desired. Because you focus so much on the surface level attributes of masculinity and you don't ever stop to think about the actual underpinnings of masculinity. Most of masculinity is about being good at serving others, about being good at self-sacrifice and putting others first. And the reason why, Macintosh, goes back to evolutionary psychology. Namely, women were the nurturing sex that carried the children, and therefore were necessary to the propagation of the species, and therefore the non-women, i.e. the men and whatever else middling gender identities you want to put in there, were evolutionarily rewarded if they were servile and protective of those women. Which again is why to even assert that misogyny is a massive problem is to ignore the fact that we are a social species reliant on procreation, and therefore the hatred of one's own mother or one's own mate is fucked from an evolutionary perspective. If you hate women, you will not breed. You twit. And therefore, misogyny has always been considered a negative thing. Moving on.
No.
Well, actually, no. There's one other thing I needed to say because I sort of lost my point halfway through there. My point in bringing up the whole masculinity is more about service and protection than it is about machismo or the lack thereof, Macintosh, is the jock and the nerd are both mocked as an archetype for allowing their own pursuits to prevent them from being useful to the fairer sex. Jocks are so interested in their own masculinity that they ignore women, therefore they're bad, and nerds lack the ability to provide and protect in a traditional way, therefore they're bad. That is the dichotomy here.
Yeah, and again, like the whole masculinity thing, there's so much nuance to it, like in actuality, that you can be a nerd and also be like built like a bodybuilder. Like I think
I mean it's rare and difficult, but they do exist.
Yeah, it's just like again, like it. I'm just saying, like masculinity itself is such a like a lot of things that a lot of people tend to like oversimplify or make into extremes. It's
Well, the funny thing is feminists like Jonathan McIntosh claim to be broadening the definition of masculinity and femininity, but usually when they criticize masculinity and femininity, they reduce it down to the most like retrograde, traditionalistic, streamlined version they possibly could get it to the point that they'll insist you must be trans or gender fluid if you don't perfectly align with one extreme or the other, which is a weird kind of backwards traditionalism. If you're not 100% masculine at all times or 100% feminine at all times, you must be gender fluid or trans because we say so, which kind of enforces traditionalism in gender roles, not undermines them.
Anyway, banana.
Our geeky hero gets to be framed as the better, smarter, more sensitive alternative. He's the misunderstood nice guy.
Hi, Betty. I'm not.
But still not necessarily good is the thing.
Yeah, they did show Back to the Future, like part 1, with Marty's father, George McFly.
Yeah,
and compared to like again, if you compare it to the antagonist of that story, which is Biff. Yeah, he is better, but the thing is, he's got the character flaw of being too scared to actually ask the girl out and stuff.
And even after he does successfully get her, he's still not perfect. He's still not framed as God's gift to women and everything in the world.
It's funny, actually, because someone pointed out that when he punched Biff out, he was technically kind of drunk because Biff's friend spiked the punch bowl.
Yep.
And George had some prior. Yep. So if he didn't have that quote-unquote liquid courage, things might have turned out differently.
Yeah. Which just that's a bummer alternate universe. One in which Biff's friend never spiked the punch bowl, so it all just. But then again, Biff probably would have been thrown in prison before too long.
No, you're actually right. No, you're right.
Because I mean he's over the top to a ridiculous kind of degree, and in a world that actually functioned like any semblance of reason or reality, she'd call the police or an angry mob and he would be beaten the fuck out of in about 5 seconds.
All right. Shall we?
Yep, banana.
Is unfairly bullied and mocked by his peers.
Hey, not every guy's born with blonde hair and a chin you could crack walnuts with. Catchphrase I had to use my imagination.
He's presented as the clear underdog in the manhood competition.
Another way of saying I'm out of this world? Lisa, I love the excitement of chasing you.
Okay, for one thing, he cut out dialogue. Again, like he's taking context out of a scene with Saved by the Bell. But again, like also, I want to bring this up. Who doesn't love an underdog story? Like, a lot of great stories are underdog stories.
But what he's saying is that these characters don't deserve the sympathetic framing because they're either just as bad or still negative enough that they shouldn't be considered positive, is what he's saying. He's basically saying you don't deserve the underdog role, which ironically Macintosh puts them in even more of an underdog role, because the thing is, and you can recognize this when it's the traditionalists doing it, when the moral powers that be decide that you're a bad person, that is also a kind of underdog. Like in Pleasantville or Footloose, when the big bad town council shows up and starts to enforce traditionalism, yeah, you can see how that's supposed to frame the rebels as the good ones. In Dead Poet Society, when the school board shows up and drags Robin Williams' character away, and they all stand on the desk, you recognize that that's supposed to show that they're the good guy, that the kids standing on the desk are the good guys, and that the big bad traditionalist patriarchy is bad, right? Well, in the same way, when you come along with your morality and you start being equally as morally strict, all you've done is make that underdog character more sympathetic, because the powers that be, on general principle, usually can get fucked. It, like, on an intuitive level, most of us like to at least believe that we are the rebels who fight the powers that be. So if the powers that be start saying shit, you're especially overly restrictive or overly strict shit, you're going to get some rebellion going, fuck you, we're gonna do this anyway.
Right. Also, this is Saved by the Bell. I've seen a little bit of it when I was growing up. And to be fair, I always I never liked the main character, Zach Morris, because there's actually a show on YouTube called Zach Morris is Trash, which, yeah, he's
Yeah,
kind of,
Zach is an asshole, and I think the show itself understood this.
yeah. I always felt a connection with Screech because, again, like, I had kind of a similar teenage life, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he is the underdog in quote unquote masculinity competition.
And yet he's still considered part of the friend group. This is the one thing that I wish real life could take cues from in regards to these kind of sitcoms, because in a case of something like Saved by the Bell, you've got the hot cheerleader, you've got the outsider artist chick, you've got the nerdy geeky guy, and then you've got the
jock,
the jock character, and then you've got another
cool
sort
guy.
of jock character who's also kind of preppy and businesslike and shit, and also kind of the troublemaker. And they're all friends, and they can all look past each other's differences and see things that are worth maintaining about each other.
Yeah, Archie, I think, did it best because they kind of did it first.
Well, yeah. You got to give points for you got to give points for getting there first. And there are similar groups all throughout stories, especially lately. I mean, how one of the examples that everyone gets introduced to from the very beginning of the childhood, pretty much since the 60s when it first came out, Scooby-Doo. Shaggy's the slacker / stoner. Fred is very obviously the jock. Daphne is the popular girl. Velma is the nerdy girl. And yet they're all friends, and in fact, all entirely necessary to their team dynamic.
Yep. All right.
Banana.
On closer inspection, however, we start to notice that these type of characters are shown engaging in a variety of harassing, entitled, and sexist behavior where women are concerned. They consistently stalk.
Again, like the scenes you're showing need more context, honestly, because
And also, what definition of these words are you using? Are you to you, it appears there is no gray area. There is no person playing hard to get or person being expected to work hard for what they obtain or any of this. It's just all harassment because reasons. And also, once again, I'd like to point out that most of your examples of misogyny, i.e. the hatred of women, actually is down to an excessive desire of women. That's what like 90% of all the rom-coms in existence have in common. They all involve a guy, usually at the beginning of the story an asshole, learning to un-asshole himself for the sake of the approval and the love and the affection of the female character. And the female character usually doesn't go through any changes at all, for the most part. She just exists at the end of the story to essentially mark the goalpost of this character has advanced to the point that they're desirable, and so now this character desires them. It's moral typecasting is the thing, and in all cases, it's the woman who decides who is worthy and who is not. So if you have a problem with the kinds of men that women choose to consider worthy, then I suggest perhaps, Macintosh, that you start talking more about misandry and less about misogyny. But what I just said would make your head explode, so never mind. Banana.
Banana.
Spy on, lie to, and try to manipulate the women in their lives. They're overbearing, they refuse to take no for an answer, and they often ignore the basic.
And usually they are punished for this exact behavior, and much of the story is about them reforming these kinds of behavior, or providing enough of a sympathetic backstory to explain where the social awkwardness came from. It's not excusing the social awkwardness, it's just saying that the social awkwardness is not the only thing that exists there, and therefore it might sometimes be worth overlooking. It's essentially the old chestnut of not judging a book by its cover. And you appear to be looking at the cover of every book, Macintosh, and seeing nothing but a red mist of misogyny.
Yeah.
Banana.
An answer, and they often ignore the basic tenets of consent.
And they are punished for this behavior, usually in comedic fashion. You twit. They are not framed as good for these actions. They are at best framed as unwitting or unknowing in these actions, which is not an excuse. It is simply a mitigating circumstance.
Yeah, wasn't the Revenge of the Nerds wasn't there a Robot Chicken sketch where they were basically put in the real world where this shit got them put in prison?
Yes. Because that is generally what happens in these kinds of situations. When someone is socially awkward around someone they desire sexually, that person, especially if the person in question is heterosexual and seeking the affection of a woman, is beaten the fuck out of and often lynched. Because there's this lie going around that lynching was about race first. And it wasn't about race first. It was about sexual purity first. I.e., lynchings happen to anyone who people believe will be a threat to their women. Black men are considered more masculine than other kinds of men, therefore they must be rapey and not able to control themselves, so let's lynch them. Gay men don't want to have sexual relationships with women, that makes them hate women, therefore they must be impure, and therefore let's lynch them. And on we go. That's what lynching was about. That's what most of these kind of situations of people getting beaten the fuck out of are about. It's let's protect the women and or my dominance and access to the women. In the case of like the jock archetype.
Okay, shall we move on?
Yep, banana.
Banana.
Behavior falls under the rubric of sexual harassment, and occasionally it escalates to the level of sexual assault. Both Revenge of the Nerds and 16 Candles include scenes in which geeky nice guys commit acts of rape. This type of behavior should be understood.
No. Number one, in the case of the woman in Revenge of the Nerds, his face was concealed and his voice was concealed, but his body type most certainly was not concealed. And when she was finished, she had no problem with consenting to this action. And in the case of 16 Candles, she remembered what happened and he did not. He drank enough that he forgot what happened. And thereby, she was the one who was able to determine whether this was an approved liaison or not. And she, in fact, pursued him afterwards, implying at least very strongly to those of us with a brain, Macintosh, that she enjoyed it enough to want to continue the association. And if you genuinely believe that intoxication with alcohol means you're not accountable to your actions, then you must further believe that the male character in 16 Candles was less in control of his actions than the female character was, and therefore she raped him. But if you believe that, your head will explode because you, for whatever reason, cannot envision a world in which women of equal standing can rape men of equal standing. And that is fucking stupid. Rape is at any point when sexual intercourse of any kind is forced on a person against their will or their knowledge. Full stop. Twit. Banana. Unless brainstorm are left.
I've returned.
Okay, huzzah.
Alright. I got nothing because I haven't seen these movies.
Okay.
So, yeah, okay. Banana?
Banana.
As reprehensible. I say should be, because that's not how these TV shows and movies frame it.
Are you guys ready?
Instead, this behavior is framed as kind of pathetic,
You guys know what you're doing here or what?
but ultimately harmless,
That's what.
and even endearing in an adorable sort of way.
Because we find naivete and lack of social graces to be endearing sometimes. Because when someone does something, loosely speaking, wrong, and they don't realize they did it, we're inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt. Your entire treatise here appears to be never ever give anyone the benefit of the doubt. If they don't know what they're doing is still terrible and should be treated as though they did it intentionally. And if they do it intentionally, then even more so. Jesus Christ, Macintosh. There is for you no charity whatsoever to anyone ever. If a person is traditionally masculine and jockey, then you will find a way to blame them. If a person is nerdy, you will find a way to blame them. If a person is completely neutral, you will find a way to blame them. And nary will you ever consider that it is in fact the desire of these women, not the hatred of these women, that motivates these people. You are making a video of misogyny, and so far, the only instances that you have shown of alleged misogyny involve either one or both parties to lesser or greater degrees desiring each other. No hatred of women as a demographic or even individually has been demonstrated here. None. Banana.
Banana.
Adorable sort of way.
You're that nerd.
Yeah.
You were wonderful.
Thanks.
And it's the adorkable part of the adorkable misogynist
Right.
that makes this trope so insidious.
I had to. Again, like I just had to finish. 20 seconds. So, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. You just showed the clip where she realizes in Revenge of the Nerds, she realizes who it is, and she realizes he's really, really good in the sack, and determines that she is entirely okay with this. Did you not hear the "you were wonderful" part? That is her consenting. Jesus H. Tap dancing Christ. She is not in any way demonstrating regret for her actions, and in fact, she proceeds to engage in those very same actions again within full understanding of her faculties. Jesus Christ, back and forth. It's one thing to blatantly lie and misrepresent shit, but please, for the love of God, for the sake of your argument, don't present the exact counter argument to your own bullshit with evidence from the thing. If you're gonna insist on calling it a thing, it is definitely not. Banana.
Banana.
So let's return to the Big Bang Theory.
We have to get rid of the time machine.
The four geeky friends on this show are written to be genuinely likable guys. They're even capable of fleeting moments of heartfelt sensitivity, thoughtfulness, and sweetness.
What is it?
In other words, they are human. Yes, go on.
Yeah, believe it or not, nerds can be, if anything, nerds are one of the more empathetic and emotional of humans.
Which isn't to exclude the possibility of other types of people being that way. It's just, in general, a person who doesn't give a fuck about what society thinks of them is more likely to be able to think for themselves and to feel for themselves, rather than somebody who has norms and decorum shoved so far up their ass that it's strangling their brain.
Yeah. I would say that the Big Bang Theory lacks a somewhat sincerity about it because all the characters after a certain season, I don't remember which, feel kind of.
Usually the world conspires against the main characters and sides against the main characters and makes them the butt of the joke, which is not sympathetic.
Well, no, it's just like nothing feels genuine, honestly.
Yeah, because every time they try to say there's something positive about one of the characters, they then proceed to immediately undo it by saying that there is something wrong with one of the characters. Usually the very same thing.
Yeah, okay. Banana?
Banana.
It's a snowflake from the North Pole.
Are you serious?
It'll last forever. I preserved it in a 1% solution of polyvinyl acetyl resin.
This non-threatening, adorkable framing is designed to excuse the other, more toxic part of the trope.
Or, to put it simply, part of being a nerd is being socially awkward and not great at reading people. Therefore, they fuck up, and their fuck-ups are framed as fuck-ups, but you're still going to frame them as though they're not because you are a disingenuous fuckwit, Jonathan McIntosh, or I should say, or you are an idiot who has no idea how anything works or has ever worked.
I mean, he dated Anita Sarkeesian, so.
The fact that you are even still alive, Jonathan, is quite a testament to your. I don't know. I guess I'm going with tenacity, because I can almost convince myself that Anita is like a praying mantis and probably eats the heads of those she fancies and then breaks up with. Because it wouldn't surprise me in the fucking slightest. That woman is scary.
I just find her stupid, but that's just me.
Yeah, but it's stupid. Her stupidity is what makes her scary because she will conjure up harassment from simple criticism and get the entire games media and the UN, which she literally did a speech in front of once, to believe her. And therefore, the entire internet needs to be censored because she says so. That is fucking terrifying.
Anyway. Banana?
Banana.
The four leading men on Big Bang Theory each present their own distinct flavor of adorable misogyny. Howard is the creepy pervert with a heart of gold.
Come to Papa, you unkosher delight. I'm not necessarily talking about the food.
Dude, that... Yeah, no, we get that's supposed to be fucked and stupid.
He is framed as stupid, ignorant, and downright evil often for doing this. When Penny punched him in the face, we were siding with Penny for the sake of the exchange.
And he does change in the later seasons because he finds someone who gets him and makes him better.
Yes, and it is considered to be a redemption arc, which therefore implies that his current behavior in the scene is negative, and therefore the act of doing this kind of shit in real life is negative. But incidentally, if a person like Howard Wolowitz, i.e. a shorter, weaker, nerdy guy, did something like this in real life, he would be found dead in a ditch in the space of about a week.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out he's pathetic in the early seasons. Like, everyone knows it because he's the only guy who still lives with his mother.
Yeah.
The fact that he acts like he's constantly hitting on people, well, women.
As though he were freaking Liberace or some shit.
Or, who's the Playboy guy again?
Hugh Hefner?
Hugh Hefner, thank you. Rest in peace, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that just also what he wears, and like I'm not trying to discredit anyone who wears that stuff, but
it's supposed to look classy, even though I can see a situation where such an outfit wouldn't look bad. Which just goes to show that it's supposed to be it's supposed to look classy and therefore imply that he has no sense of taste and no sense of really no sense of self-awareness whatsoever is the implication.
I also want to just point out the hair.
Yeah.
Like, just
granted, it's obviously supposed to be a Beatles reference, so that implies that he likes the Beatles, which might in fact be one of his areas of geekdom that he doesn't share with everybody else, which would be nice to be focused on every now and then. But never mind.
My grandfather's a Beatles fan.
Yeah, I am too. I'm not knocking the Beatles. I'm just saying it seems very much like he's taking his cues from like a 60s hippie level aesthetic, Howard. So
it might be one of those subtle details.
Yeah.
No, I'm not getting into a tangent about the Beatles.
Yeah.
Good music though. Totally recommend listening to it.
Yeah. The Beatles are awesome. The Beatles are awesome.
Yeah. I actually had the tape of the Yellow Submarine animation.
Ah.
That was trippy to watch as a kid.
Yeah.
Anyway, Banana.
Would you have opened the door if you knew it was me?
Not since I found out the teddy bear you gave me had a webcam in it.
Throughout the first several seasons, he's depicted as a wannabe pickup artist.
Yes, we're here to fix the cable.
He stalks, harasses, objectifies, and tries to trick dozens of women.
Yeah, again,
he's framed as in the wrong for those actions, and the fact that he's stupid and ignorant and unself-aware is the joke.
Okay, what kind of stupid are we talking about? Are we talking general stupid, or are we just talking stupid as in personality?
Stupid as in like social skills.
Okay, yeah, no, that I agree with because he's an engineer and for NASA and stuff. So
He's clearly they're all intellectually high functioning, and this is a good way to point out there is a massive difference between social intelligence and scientific / logical intelligence or mathematical intelligence. And in fact, if we really want to go down this identitarian rabbit hole, we just need to be dragging us down, Macintosh. Most of the negative behaviors you attribute to nerds and incels in this instance are often symptoms of things like high functioning autism or OCD. So are you going to say that people with high functioning autism or OCD should be shunned and shamed like you're shunning and shaming geeks here? Or are you simply saying that anyone who doesn't fall under the spectrum but still has these traits should be shunned and shamed and ridiculed? Because that, Macintosh, sounds rather victimizing to me, and feminists are supposed to be the people who care about not victimizing or marginalizing people. But I correct myself, or I should, because it seems very much, Macintosh, that you would say you cannot marginalize people based on the external parts of themselves, but you are totally and completely capable or permitted to marginalize people for what's going on in themselves. And that, Macintosh, is quite frankly fucked up beyond all reasoning, because in my opinion, it should be the other way around, if anything. People should be allowed to make some, not all, but some snap judgments based on a person's external appearance, but they should give credit or give dues to a person's internal appearance. And why, Macintosh? Because a person's internal nature is more reflective of their actual nature than their external one. A person's skin tells you nothing about their personality or their beliefs or their positions on anything. If you want to know this information, you have to get to know the person inside the shell, not just the shell.
Hello.
Yeah.
Banana. Yeah. One sec. I do think at like 10 minutes we should call this because I'm.
Yeah, it's getting difficult for me to keep my eyes open too.
Yeah. Oh, so I don't think I could handle any more than that.
Another 20 minutes of Jonathan McIntosh's woo.
Yep. Okay. Banana.
Dozens of women into sleeping with him. Howard talks about women the way a zookeeper might talk about trapping and taming wild animals.
See, first we let the lawyers and the jocks thin the herd, and then we go after the weak and the old and the lame.
Oh, okay.
He's manipulating.
Yeah, again, like, he's in the wrong, and we know it. That's the joke.
Yeah, but if you noticed, he also referred to the men as though they were animals in that clip. Because he's making an analogy between human behavior and animal behavior, which, given the fact that evolutionary psychology exists, is kind of a valid thing, even if he's using it horribly and bastardizing it. Because, like it or not, Macintosh, human beings are not a separate category of, like, some kind of fallen angel. Human beings are animals. Very advanced, very intelligent animals, but we are still animals. And therefore, if a person is the kind of person who likes nature documentaries, for example, and they want to analogize human behavior and animal behavior, I see no problem with that. But I just want to point out that you got all in a tizzy over treating women like animals, or like a zookeeper would treat animals, but you didn't even notice the fact that he was also doing it to not only other men, but himself. In his metaphor, he is like a fucking mountain lion going after a bunch of gazelle. And so is Raj in this instance. But you didn't even notice that. In this metaphor, it's perfectly consistent to refer to people as animals because everyone is being referred to as an animal. If he was doing it just to women, you might have a point. But he did it to everyone in this instance because he's referring to human behavior and analogizing it using animal behavior. Fuck off, Macintosh. Banana.
One sec. All right, Banana.
Manipulative, and his behavior sometimes crosses the line into criminal activity.
There's the house. I found America's top models.
And he's punished for this.
Giselle are sunbathing.
And he's punished for this.
You can recognize people on Google Earth?
Of course not. I got a buddy.
And he is punished for the
I don't, for this specific one, I'm not entirely sure.
Well, I mean, later on in the series, when he needs to get clearance for something at NASA, they pull stuff like this out and harangue him over it. So I'm willing to say it might not be proportional because comedy, but he is at least in universe punished for this and framed as the bad guy for doing it.
Okay, well, yeah, no, okay, fine.
And again, the joke is him being an unself-aware dickhead, and us all being appalled by him being an unself-aware dickhead.
Plus, I think everyone besides him and Raj, who are, let's be honest, him and Raj are kind of the more pathetic of the four.
Yeah, and even the other members in the group are appalled by this. Even Sheldon, who probably is on some kind of spectrum, because judging by his behavior and his compulsions and his lack of understanding of things like sarcasm, he's probably at least somewhat on the spectrum. And I'm not saying that to disparage Sheldon. I'm just saying,
actually, they brought that
a person who normally doesn't pick up on social cues was even able to pick up on the fact that this was shitty.
Actually, they brought that up. Like, his mother had him tested.
Yeah, and the tests were inconclusive, apparently.
They didn't take him to Houston, though, so...
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Banana?
Banana.
No.
And I got a buddy of mine at NORAD to have a spy drone fly over.
I should note that once Howard is in a committed long-term relationship, the way that his male chauvinism is expressed does shift slightly. So he stops trying to be a womanizer, but he still demands to be taken care of.
Okay.
Okay, question
it's
is...
called character development, Macintosh.
And it takes a while for these characters, because... Well, that's actually something I can respect about Big Bang Theory, because actual character development or personal growth for a person, like a real person, yes,
it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while.
Yeah. I mean, granted, you could have drastic and extreme changes. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But the show, again, like I appreciate...
Unlike most sitcoms, it doesn't try to wrap up everything in a neat little bow at the end of the 30-minute mark.
Mm-hmm.
It still does try to still does try to wrap things up nicely, but it doesn't wrap up everything, really.
Yeah. All right. Banana?
Banana.
And he refuses to share in any of the domestic responsibilities.
Want to pause the video game and help me clean up?
I'm not cleaning up. Look at the mess the Joker made of Gotham City.
I want this to feel like my house, too.
Oh, Honey, of course it's your house. Why else would you be cleaning it all the time?
Again, he is in the wrong for that. We all know
The
this.
joke that
And
he is in the
believe-
wrong for that.
I believe he helps cleaning by the end.
Yeah.
Which I don't get. You also have to keep in mind that his mentality is the only woman in his life for most of his life.
With his mother.
Yeah. And basically he was babied.
And she was a single mother.
As someone who's kind of lived in a household like that, well, actually, more or less, give or take,
Mm-hmm.
I can attest that at times you do feel babied and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's a thing that happens, and depending on the person, you can grow used to it and expect it from everyone else.
Or you can feel uncomfortable with it and seek other kinds of interaction.
Well, actually, for me, it was more I wanted to help around and do things.
Yeah.
So I learned how to actually be well, I don't want to say functional because I'm kind of not. A good helper, I guess, is
useful.
Useful.
Anyway.
Thank you. But yeah, no, it's just like the joke is that he is still technically a man-child because of how he was raised.
And the joke wouldn't be funny if we didn't consider that a negative thing in the context of the scene.
Yeah. And again, he realizes it and he changes and grows.
Yeah. Again, you appear to have a problem with the very notion of character development, the idea that a character isn't perfect from the get-go or has anything they need to overcome.
Or is a deconstruction of a character archetype to be nihilistic and cynical and I'm sorry, no, that's a completely different thing.
Yeah, it's different, but they're related. It's either a character has to be perfect and flawless and never experience any character development ever from the get-go, or they have to be so nihilistic and cynical that they never learn anything, and we don't expect them to. Those are the two approved extremes at the moment, it seems.
Yeah, I've made my thoughts on both those ideas many times. Let's move on before I go on a tangent.
Yeah, banana.
Raj is the sensitive guy turned inappropriate drunk. He's the show's token geek of color and is endlessly mocked for being the most effeminate of the four friends. Raj is also the most...
Okay. So as a geek of color myself, oh my god, I can't believe I fucking said that.
Just get it out, man. Just get it out, and then you can get away from the term.
I do. Okay, first off, does it? It doesn't matter what the fuck he is. Okay, what the fuck he looks like. Okay, the fact that he's he's most socially awkward around women. Okay, he was raised in India, to be fair, and I don't know much about Indian culture or like how that works. Unfortunately, I probably should look that up at some point.
Yeah, it's a bit. Needless to say, it's a bit restrictive, shall we say, in terms of like development.
Thanks, Gandhi.
I
was that's a joke, kind of.
I know. It's just like I'm not sure if I should laugh at that or disavow it first.
To be fair, he wasn't perfect, so.
No, he most certainly was not.
But yeah. Granted, he was rich technically in India, kind of still is in America. But I think really the only I'm inferring from what I remember of the show.
Yeah.
is that really the only woman he ever really interacted with was like his mother and his sister, because I think they have private tutors or something.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't be.
Also, he's not the asshole drunk, because there's literally a line in one episode when he's getting drunk where Howard says, he's an ass when he doesn't, you just don't hear it.
Yeah, like I can understand like you become a little more confident with the quote unquote liquid courage.
Yeah.
I do think he's just. I feel bad for him because I know what that's kind of like to be unable to talk to people because you're so socially awkward and shy.
Honestly, of the four of them, I think Raj is the most sympathetic out of a lot of them.
Again, that's for an argument for a different day, but
yeah. But also, yeah, I want to fixate back on this token geek of color thing for a minute, because Howard is Jewish. Leonard is also loosely implied to be at least of Jewish descent, and Sheldon is
possibly autistic.
Yeah, possibly on the spectrum of some kind or other.
Yeah.
So I think as far as diversity goes, they're doing just fine. Or don't you consider Jews to be different from quote unquote whites anymore? And if you don't, then have fun dealing with the accusations of anti-Semitism. Then, if you want to group all the Jews in with the people who gassed the Jews, then have fun dealing with the anti-Semitism charges from that.
Right, but fuck, I had something. All right, as a fellow geek of color,
the moment of silence for the pain and cringe that Brainstormer and Russ now endure.
Legitimately, I was just trying to hold back the vomit. It's nice to have someone that is a nerd but isn't to do his speak. I'm doing this as his speak.
Yeah.
It is nice to see a person of color instead of just another white man in a group of nerds.
Yep. Although, to be fair, once again, just because the main characters happen to all be whites or white adjacent doesn't mean that geek culture ever had a diversity problem. Because the thing about geek culture is it tends to draw people who otherwise feel like outcasts.
Yeah.
This is a thing.
Shit, what? But no, like, you are right. Like, I think out of all of them, I can relate to him in the way that it's hard to talk to people in general. Not really around women, honestly, just people in general.
I relate to him in the sense that in addition to all the geeky stuff he's into, he's also into more like arty-farty sort of stuff.
I also find that he's hypocritical about his own Indian culture. Like, he does a whole thing, like the joke with the whole cow thing, but it turns out that he ate burgers before.
Yeah, the cow is supposed to be sacred in India, but Raj forgoes his heritage and culture for the sake of enjoying himself, which, quite frankly, is a attitude I can perfectly get behind. Because, I mean, if you want to enjoy life, you're gonna have to get used to telling the people who want you to not enjoy things to go fuck themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And this works for Howard too, because he eats a lot of things that are not kosher, and he's Jewish. So yeah, but better to live as a master in your own house than as a servant in somebody else's.
Shall we?
Yeah, banana.
Banana.
Socially awkward around women. In the first few seasons, he can't speak to women at all.
That's just fascinating.
Thank you.
Except when he's drunk or on drugs.
Would you like to hear more about it in my hot tub?
And it's in those uninhibited moments when we see some very extreme levels of underlying misogyny.
He was drunk. If you want to sincerely make the argument that cognitive impairment from drinking doesn't make any difference, then have so much fun explaining to me how a woman who gets drunk can be raped by a man, but a man who gets drunk cannot be raped by a woman under any circumstances.
Don. I feel like that's a different thing, but okay.
Well, but it's related because every time a female character gets drunk, some feminist will make the argument that she was raped if they have sex while she was drunk. But
you also have to. I would also argue the fact: what if both characters are drunk when they have sex?
Yeah, and in that case, like I mentioned earlier, in the case of 16 Candles, the male character was actually more drunk than the female character was, and she remembered and he didn't, and yet it was, according to Macintosh, it was still him raping her, even though he wasn't conscious at the time. I point this out because he's going to blame Raj for his drunken behavior and assume that it's more reflective of his actual personality, but at no point will he ever look at a female who's drunk and consenting to sex and say, well, your drunk self is just an extension of your actual self, so clearly no failure of consent occurred here. No, he's going to say that she couldn't give consent because she was drunk, but Raj can totally be judged for everything he's ever done while he was drunk.
Also, the fact that I think he's kind of forgetting, I don't know if he brings it up later, maybe not, just in case I forget, is that most, if not all, the characters, like the nerd characters of the Big Bang Theory group, have some underlying trauma from their past that's kind of shaped them into these awkward social messes. Like, okay, just to run down the list. Well, Raj might be the exception, kind of, because I don't know much about him.
Well, but I mean, you can make the argument that him being sheltered was not healthy for him.
Fair enough.
Then you've got Howard and his father abandonment issues and single mother.
Yeah. Sheldon, who lost his father after his father. Well, yeah, he's such an extreme genius that he's always kind of felt alienated to people. And not the fact that he walked in on his father cheating on his mother.
Yeah. And his grandfather died. And
his father also died.
Yeah, and he was on the spectrum throughout all this. And Leonard was systematically denied affection from his mother and shut down as a result of it.
Yeah. So every character has demons or skeletons in their closets that's affected them in such a way that it's kind of made them these people unintentionally, I think.
Yeah. Now, you could make the argument that there was always going to be the seeds of social awkwardness here.
Yeah,
because that is entirely possible. There are people who are just more socially awkward or less good at reading people, or even less good at reading specific kinds of people. Like I was just telling Brainstormer before the stream that a guy I liked in high school, I can read any book on just about any subject. I can be pretty good at reading people and even intuiting like psychological diagnoses of them sometimes. But where this one guy who I like is concerned, my brain just switches off, and I feel like a dribbling idiot all the time. So yeah, it happens, and it especially happens among people who make us nervous because we find them attractive, which is exactly the dynamic we're talking about here. That's why nerds are nerds, because they can't be confident and sociable and alpha, quote unquote, among people they find desirable, because their brains switch off and they become morons, or there's something wrong with their brain to begin with and they don't even have the option of switching it on. Because social intelligence is not the same as analytical intelligence or scientific intelligence or even philosophical existential intelligence. It's the same thing with Rick Sanchez. He may be the greatest mind in the multiverse, but when it comes to actually relating to people, he's a fucking invalid.
Yeah. Shall we?
Yeah, banana.
Banana.
Levels of underlying misogyny come to the forefront.
I'm very comfortable here. Penny dear, why don't you shoot another silver bullet my way?
Where are you going? We're doing so well. She never even got to see my penis.
Again, this is these are framed as the jokes.
Yes, and once again, I'd like to point out the fact that Raj was drunk. So if drunkenness is a modifier so powerful that we have to give all women the notion of having been raped because they were drunk at the time, then so too we cannot judge Raj for his actions while drunk in this case. Or, if you like, we can judge Raj for his actions while drunk, but we also need to extend this to female characters who commit actions while drunk and therefore consented to sex while drunk.
I'd also like to point out everyone does stupid shit when they're drunk.
Yes, because human beings need inhibition. That's one of the reasons why our frontal lobes are so calorie costly, i.e., like 20% of your body's nourishment goes directly to your brain, because it takes a lot to maintain the brain, because our frontal lobes operate at like 10 times the speed of the rest of our bodies.
Right.
Because they're the part of our brains that regulate our actual like inhibitions and behavior. So if you remove that, then you're going to get people being uninhibited naturally.
Okay, so banana.
Leonard is the nice guy enabler. He plays the more down-to-earth, normal one of the group. Still, he participates in much of the same behavior as his cohorts, just to a lesser degree. Leonard's character.
Yeah, like I'll be honest, I relate more to Leonard, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't say he's an enabler.
Yeah.
I think
once again, the entire point of the show, literally from the off, was him improving as a person to be worthy of her.
Mm-hmm. I would honestly argue that he was the main character.
Yeah.
Theory.
In at least in the original seasons and in the pilot, he was established as the point of view character for the audience, and also the character in need of the most character development.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe not in need of it, but most crucial to the plot.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, he's not an enabler. He's just
imperfect and in the process of improving himself.
Yeah.
As per the entire conceit of the show.
His past was he was denied love from his very mother, who was honestly, I'm more surprised she wasn't the mother of Sheldon.
Honestly, I think both Sheldon and Leonard would be better off if they had just switched moms.
Yeah.
If Leonard had had Sheldon's nurturing mother, he probably would be better off. And if Sheldon had a mother who understood his intellectualism and his cold analysis, I think he'd be better off. I think it's most of the problems of the two characters in Big Bang Theory, the two the main duo, as it were, could be resolved by if they had gotten switched in the hospital or something.
Honestly, I think it works for both of them because I think without Mary Cooper, Sheldon's mom, he wouldn't have been able to have without that initial. Oh, hey Ed, good to see you. Sheldon wouldn't have been able to have that seed of kindness and empathy that he does. He's always had. Like you see it in the show. He's just because of him possibly being on the
I don't know. I think maybe having someone who can compete with him on his level would help a lot of his stuntedness. Because part of I think what stunted Sheldon was that he was a intellectual in a town and home and state full of two-bit hicks. And I also think that because Leonard's mother was a psychologist, if Sheldon had had access to her from an early age, he would have had a much better understanding of human nature, even if it were just an intellectual one, and he could have adapted better.
What I honestly find weird is that a woman who's so emotionally detached and stuff was a psychiatrist.
Well, no, it kind of makes sense because if you can look at the human mind without emotion, you can kind of see it as a interesting puzzle to be dissected and examined.
Of course, you would agree with her because
I'm not agreeing with her. I'm just saying I can see why a person of that kind of mentality would become a psychologist because she's probably more interested in the mind as an end in itself than she is necessarily about the people attached to the mind necessarily. Which isn't to say that she doesn't want to help people or that she's a sociopath or something. I'm just saying that's probably her more akin to her rationale is I want to know how the mind works for its own sake rather than, and if people benefit from that, that's fine, but it's not necessarily the goal or what inspired her.
Anyway, shall we banana?
We shall banana.
Character arc is basically the pathetic nice guy who refuses to take no for an answer and who eventually gets the girl.
He improved. This is the entire conceit of the show.
They started to slowly wear me down.
Like a river.
The joke is that that's not
One of
the
the
full
roles
story, Macintosh.
Okay, please continue.
The joke is that both Penny and Leonard went through character development in order to be worthy of each other. That is the joke.
I will say though, Penny is a weird one to me because she doesn't even have the basic knowledge of pop culture like everyone knows and grew up with.
Yeah, like there's a I don't understand how she could be sheltered enough that she like doesn't get a Looney Tunes reference or something like that.
Or Star Wars.
Yeah, like how do you grow up in America without watching Star Wars at least once?
Seriously, like just that was always the weirdest thing I found out. I knew. Like
Yeah.
I could get
Even the most slack-jawed frat boy dude bros know what Star Wars is.
Yeah, Star Wars for everyone. Like seriously, what the fuck?
Yeah. It's kind of like in a later episode when the boys are away at a comic convention and all the girls sit around trying to figure out why comic books are interesting, and Bernadette and Amy for some reason don't know anything about comic books, and I'm sorry, but I call bullshit. Bernadette and Amy are both professional scientists and both extremely nerdy. I refuse to believe they don't know anything about geek culture.
Okay, I could get the comic books like with superhero comics, but comic books as a whole, probably not.
Well, but I mean, even the most casual female comic book fan probably knows about people like Black Widow and Wonder Woman, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with that. You know, they actually made reference to female Thor in the show.
Yeah, fuck.
I just found that interesting. Although it does date them, I'm not gonna lie.
It does.
Yeah. Anyway.
How much longer do we have to go before we get to the stopping point?
Whenever he stops on Leonard, I suppose. It's at 9:32.
Okay, so we've got 30 more seconds of stuff to get through before we can reach a stopping point, which we will then resume in March.
Yeah, because it's February and we have things planned for February, so.
Yeah.
All right. Banana.
Leonard plays on the show is as the guy who excuses and enables the sexism of his male friends.
And you know that deep down inside,
No.
you're a really nice guy. Cut the crap. You set this up, didn't you?
He defends his friend, the horror.
Okay, look, there is a big difference between saying that he's a nice guy behind all the bullshit and dumbassery and excusing him from...
Yeah, again, no one ever excused Howard for anything.
No.
And no one ever excused socially awkward people for being socially awkward until probably about the 80s when nerds started to prove themselves worthy and demonstrate that the normies were wrong all along.
Okay, so Ed and Slitherclaw said some interesting stuff about Penny. Didn't she have a massive debt that Leonard married into? Slitherclaw, it's possible. Clicks and habits. Ed says people have done more for less hot chicks.
This is true.
So wait, oh my god, I can't believe I'm going to say this, and I hate using modern lingo because it's mostly just dumb. But does that make Leonard one of the first simps? Oh shit. Give it a moment, folks.
Okay, sorry. My StreamYard glitched, I guess. Anyway, what were you saying? Something about Leonard being the first, and then I didn't catch it. Brainstormer. You. I can't hear you. Okay, testing.
Hey. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. What were you saying about Leonard being the first, and then I cut out?
Simp.
Yeah.
God, I hate using that word, but I mean,
well,
technically,
to be fair, simping like that has been a thing for pretty much since the beginning of the species.
Okay, fair enough, but technically, it's a mutual relationship. Like, it's an honest argument that they both have bettered each other, and also love each other deeply.
Yeah, they both went through character development in order to become a happy couple.
Yeah. Yeah, good time to call the stream, says Slitherclaw. I wouldn't disagree, but we got 10 seconds, so.
Yep. How much could they possibly get wrong in 10 seconds? He said knocking on wood like his life depended on it.
Why you gotta say that shit, man? You know you're gonna jinx us.
I knocked on wood, so I'm going. I hope we will be fine, but yeah.
Right. Shall we?
Banana.
Hooker, isn't she?
A prostitute, yes.
You already gave her the money?
Yes.
Thank you.
That's 10 seconds.
Prostitution is the exchange of goods and services. No lack of consent was implied here.
To be fair, yeah, no, basically what Dalton said.
It's a woman offering consensually access to her body and or attention for monetary gain. And there's a reason it's called the world of this profession. Because I'm pretty sure that as long as we've had a notion of transactions, there has been the notion of transactions for sex.
Yeah. Shit. Yeah, so again, Leonard's not an enabler. He's never excused any of his friends' behaviors.
He's just been a decent friend and thereby stood up for his friends.
Yeah.
As you do. Or at least I should say as any reasonable human being does.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean he doesn't call them out when they're being dumbasses. In fact, quite a lot of the comedy comes from him calling them out for being dumbasses. But
like his dynamic with Sheldon.
Yeah. But when push comes to shove, they are still his friends, and so they merit some degree of benefit of the doubt, especially when he knows them.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're calling it. It's kind of our last. Yeah. So we hope you all have enjoyed our 100th podcast special. It's not really, to be fair, it wasn't really anything special. It's kind of something we always do.
Yeah.
So like we said, we're going to do in March. We're going to finish this video because we got things for February.
Yeah.
And for our 120th podcast, we are going to do the same thing with another video that we had planned for this night, but due to time purposes.
Yeah. The length was more than half an hour, so it was like, we can't do that, and the Jonathan McIntosh one. So
yeah, so close to half an hour actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah. So we hope you all had a good time. We will see you next week, starting our month of February on Valentine's Day. And if you're a lonely person, come by and hang out with all us lonely people.
Yep. We will be alone together and together alone.
Yep. So with that, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, auf Wiedersehen, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
100 more excuses to fuck off.